Thank you, guys. My name is Ben Flaccus with Undertone. Little quick background on Undertone for those who don't know. There I am. There's John. Great. Undertone has been around for about 20 years, 20 plus years, which is an eternity in digital media, so we're doing something right. If you know Undertone, you probably know us for really engaging and unmissable high-impact ad experiences. Think like our full-page takeover, page grabber units, an in-house creative team, best in class, that builds these beautiful creative experiences, premium publisher network where we can run these non-standard ad experiences and check the box against not only tremendous scale but brand safety. I joined about 3 years ago to build out Undertone Commerce, really sitting on top of that platform, but really thinking about how to be data-driven in how we target and personalize content, offers, messaging, and create solutions for brands and retailers, and really ultimately show that personalization can drive outcomes for our clients at every stage of the funnel. So you can hear more about the work that we're doing in a session, 2 sessions from now, last session of the day. But now I'm thrilled to be joined by John Giaquinto to talk about John's experience at Rite. And I'm going to tee this up, John. If marketing is a mix of art and science, then John embodies that better than almost anyone, with a bachelor's degree in art and a master's degree in communication science. So maybe with that, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, John?
I don't usually like to talk about my background, but I was an art major. Actually went into advertising, classic, wanted to be Darren Stevens from The Rich and come up with all these creative ideas. I was more in the design side of creative movement, and is this good?
Yeah, thank you. It's well, sir.
Just gotta get my picture right on this thing. And I found myself always wanting to get research to create the designs around that, and then actually get the measurement to see if I did a good job. And in my quest to do that, I got deeper and deeper into research and analytics, and hence my master's degree, and it just kind of kept going until now. I'm pretty much just a data geek. So,
John, you've been at Rite now for a little less than a year. Is that about right?
About 10 months.
And 10 months. And but you have a pretty interesting background in, you've touched a lot of categories in retail, but a lot of grocery specifically.
Yeah, a lot of grocery, retail in general, but in the last 10 or so years, it's been very data focused.
So when you got to Rite, I'd love to get a little bit of the scene that you, and what you inherited, because you did something pretty impressive in the first less than a year, which is you essentially doubled the sales that you're seeing from your programs.
Yeah, we did. It actually looks even better than that because we improved the measurement, but just even looking at the same type of measurement across the first fiscal year versus the year before that. And our fiscal ends in February for some reason, which I cannot bend my mind around at all for some reason. But we've doubled the amount of incremental sales that comes out of our personalized CRM programs. And because there's a lot of cost, we're not very digitally first at Rite, so we've got a lot of direct mail and production. So there's a big threshold to cross with production costs. So once you cross that, EBITDA can grow even faster. And we've got, I think, the fiscal year that just ended was 500% of the year before in EBITDA contribution. So margin to margin, everything, every metric is significantly increased.
That's amazing. And so when you think about starting to get into personalization, by the way, I love your title because you touch kind of the why, the how,
I made that
the what.
I totally made that up.
But when you talk about personalization here, and you looked at this file and you realized you were essentially talking to your top customers, and your strategy was to start to go deeper and understand how to personalize content for lapsed buyers, new shoppers, right? So you really went deep and had to really kind of upend some conventions there, didn't you?
Yeah, and it's not the first time I've had to do that. I mean, the tendency, and honestly, there's a lot of logic around when you're trying to optimize things, trying to get better ROI. Look at your audience. Your top customers are always going to give you better ROI. So the tempting thing, especially if you get a lot of production costs, is to play small ball. and I love to say this to CMOs and CEOs, you tell me the ROI you want me to get, and I can get it. You tell me the response rate you want me to get, and I can get it. Rate-based metrics can't be the only thing that we look at, especially companies in a situation like Rite, and Google it if you don't know. But we've lost a lot of customers in the last couple of years. We're in Chapter 11, we closed stores. It's really about scale. So I went in and said, look, we're going to look at these metrics, but we need to do something at the scale to help turn around the company. And I can make these metrics look fantastic, but instead, I'm going to come in, and I warned everyone, I'm going to make the metrics look terrible. But I'm going to get a net number that's higher, and we'll optimize from there. And I have found, and I'd love to know if the audience has found this or the opposite, but I have found if you scale and then you optimize, you end up in a much better place than if you try to optimize and then ask for more money, ask for more money.
I see
and I
that's
also didn't think we had the
there's,
time.
there's agreement here, so.
Good. You're all correct.
So tell me about some of the data that you're using to personalize. What are you looking for, and then maybe tell us a little bit about what kind of content is being personalized and how you're reaching consumers.
Yeah, this is the least sexy story that you will hear when anyone's talking about data-driven marketing. We're using transaction data, and then I would say like the metadata from that is using that transaction data, doing segmentation based on engagement. So it's essentially, are people shopping frequently? Are they shopping broadly? How much are they spending? And the combination of those two things, somebody's individual shopping plus what segment they're in, we're looking at just essentially engaging with them more, moving them up the segments. So what I've done is we've been able to look at that, look at our performance in CRM, and my predecessors, I don't think anyone's here in the room, but I know at least 4 of them, they were forced to have smaller and smaller budgets and to go, like we said, into those top segments only. And what we've done is we've looked at the economics of going deeper. We ran the numbers, and then we said, "Fuck it, let's do it anyway." And then here we are. And they didn't fire me yet.
So you're doing something right too. So
Well, or we're really lucky. But yeah, that whole idea of getting to the scale. I mean, when you think about production, it's a little more natural, maybe for a graphic designer that works on printing things, to know that your unit costs go down dramatically as you start printing. So one of the things that happens when you try to optimize and cut your audience down is that you're actually creating a lot of inefficiencies as well. So we took advantage of the inverse of that. We brought our unit costs down, even though we're going to audiences where the number of redeemers was so small, they had to cover more production pieces, if you will. But it still worked out much faster than we thought.
we need to the last word in your title, analytics now, and help me understand. How are you evaluating success of these programs? What were sort of the metrics that you used?
So not all the metrics are equal. The first thing is incremental sales. We want to have incremental sales in an efficient way. But remember I said, we're going to solve for that later. Let's get the sales. So we solved for incremental sales. And of course, we were able to double that. And that's just measured with test and control at the campaign level, but also the long-term level. So we've got 2 control groups. We've got people that don't get a campaign when a campaign goes up. We also have people that don't get several campaigns in a row. And looking at both of those, you will generally see in retail that there's a difference between the 2. And generally, the total sales that you make long-term is a multiple. And you can build and plan that into your program and take that into account. It's usually more than 1 time, usually more than double. It's less than that where I am now, but we looked at that. But we also do use media mix modeling, and to me, that's great to measure everybody else's stuff, but it also comes back and is in the same range of what we're seeing with test and control. So it's another point of validation.
So when you look at those long-term control groups, you're looking at, can you effectively change behavior, migrate consumers from one segment to another? That's sort of how you're thinking about success on longer scale terms.
Yeah, we first look at essentially we first just look at sales. Is it creating incremental sales? But when you're looking long term, those incremental sales have to include things like retention and frequency. That's why those numbers are different than the short term. As we pull back and we look, we want to see segment migration. That takes a little longer because if your segments are done correctly, they are reasonably stable and they change on the over.
So talk to me about how you create a little bit more of a narrative for consumers, especially with personalization, and sort of fight the temptation to have marketing departments can be very siloed. You can end up bombarding the consumer with multiple messages that don't provide that coherent narrative. So how do you think about personalization as a tool to put the consumer at the center and tailor messaging to them?
First, I want to clarify my answer that we've not solved that, not even close, and I don't even see it solved in many places at all. But to me, segmentation is really what you should start. You should have goals for segments, and personalization should be how you motivate those people and change their individual behavior. But people in a segment, that segment should be a definition across multiple groups. I mean, we've talked about this. We met just about a week ago, but I don't work with Ben. Ben works with somebody else in my group, so he can be doing personalization. I'm doing personalization because we're getting the same people with contradictory messages, which I've got less of a problem with than the fact that we could have contradictory goals. So to me, it should center around segmentation. It should start with the customer, and you should be finding treatments and offers for those customers. You shouldn't be coming up with treatments and offers and finding audiences. It sounds like the same thing we've ended up with.
That's maybe a good segue into the controversial statement. I'm going to put you on the spot here because you talk about the idea of finding the audience and delivering the right offer versus the inverse, right? And you had a great statement. I'm going to read this. You said, beware the corrupting influence of vendor funding, which I thought was a great, very controversial statement, especially at a time when so much the biggest trend in media is probably the trend towards retail media networks, which are all about maximizing that vendor investment. So help us understand how you balance those two.
So apologies to CPG vendors here who motivate, or especially shopper marketing people who work with retailers. But vendor funding is a great thing, but it is only a net profit if the vendors are funding something that you would have done anyway. And merchandising folks sometimes forget that, and I've had them admitted to me in a quiet moment or with a few scotches. They will admit that they have done things that were not the right thing for the customer, not the right thing for the retailer, but they need to make a vendor funding allowance metric. It often encourages behavior that's got nothing to do with changing customer behavior. So I say beware vendor funding. I've taken tens of millions of dollars of vendor funding, don't get me wrong, but I make sure that vendors are helping me fund things that promote their products to people that I'm trying to retain, and that is a net good to them. I don't design it for the vendors to make money. What ends up happening, if you do it right, it makes the vendors money as well. But it's not designed for that. And you know what, when I've been able to compare across my peers, they're doing the same exact thing, but starting with the vendor funds and trying to design more for it, it outperforms for the vendor as well. So vendor funding can change the conversation in a way that ends up not being correct.
So going back to measurement, how you measure that, how you measure that incremental sales.
So when you measure, like from the vendor's perspective, you can measure it differently. Still test and control, but you look at individual product, and you will come up with a different number.
And broadly speaking, when you talked about building those treatments earlier, I'd love for you to kind of expound on that. Just when you're designing your experiments and building those treatments, forget the vendor funding for a minute.
Yeah.
How are you thinking about designing those treatments for them? What are you, and maybe even just getting into the weeds of how you design those test and control, and as a methodology, thinking about that versus looking at attribution methodologies that may have other inherent biases.
Yeah. So usually when we design things around consumer behavior, we're really just trying to give them incentives and just observing if that changes. I think sometimes most of us in our loyalty came from marketing, and we think we're creating a relationship with the consumer and we're making them feel something. And we probably are, but we don't actually know from the data that they've changed the way they feel or that they've got a new awareness or anything like that. Maybe long term you can measure that, you can connect it to behavior, but I like to think of it as a black box. I put these incentives in, I do personalization, I make sure to optimize for relevancy, and then I see if that does change the behavior, and then we optimize from there. But you asked about essentially testing control versus regression analysis,
or versus attribution methodologies that have other challenges in kind of truly understanding the consumer behavior.
So I think as you're first of all, if you're reaching people in multiple ways, I think like last touch attribution, the validity of that is questionable because it just gets too complex. The last thing it doesn't take into account the context. Media mix modeling and things like that are essentially regression analysis. I'm shocked that it can, and people who did much better in math than me could explain it, and I can't, but I am shocked that you can come up with a 90% confidence interval that media mix model at the end explains X percent of your sales. None of that is as precise as an individual discrete measurement with testing control at the person level. But you can't do that for everything, and that doesn't give you a comparison across multiple media. So I think there's a place for testing control on individual campaigns at the person level, and I think there's a place for media mix modeling. I think they complement each other.
So what advice do you give to marketers who are thinking about adopting a more robust data-driven personalization strategy? What advice would you give them as they sort of stand that up for the first time?
So a little bit of a review of what we said. First of all, I think you go for scale and then optimize, which is counterintuitive in how corporations work to be funded, especially if it's a new program. I know there's people in the audience that have launched new programs recently. The way things go in a corporation, tell me if this sounds familiar. Okay, we'll try it out, we'll give you this much money. If it works, we'll give you more money. And you never cross that threshold of where the returns are efficient. So you need to just get people focused on scale first and say, I want to move the big deal. I want you to see the results of this at the top line sales of the company. And start with that. You can always cut, you can always optimize, and you will. If you start at the bottom, you get more and more money, you'll never reach a point of optimization that was good enough for investment. That's number one. Number two, no matter what anyone says, because none of us really know how this stuff works, there's very little that would make me deviate from just the most relevancy you can get. And I've evolved on this myself, but it shows up in the data, it shows up experiment after experiment, that if you give people incentives to do something that they're not doing already, you can change behavior a little bit, but you're not going to get that long-term retention, you're not going to get as many sales, and it doesn't create as much incrementality. It's counterintuitive, but the most incrementality you can get is changing their behavior by incenting something that's as close to their current behavior as possible. And there's things in behavioral economics like the concept of nudge, that you're just nudging behavior. If you try to dramatically change their behavior, it doesn't do much at all. And you will always be able to see with A/B testing stuff that you did something, and one thing works better than another. But if you really want to go for that scale and change many people's behavior, retain them more, get more sales from them at a dramatic level, like doubling incremental sales in a CRM program in less than a year, you're going to have to start with relevancy and start with scale.
So just in terms of relevancy, how personalized do you get with these offers?
So without actually running the math, we do things at a level of complexity that if we've got several offers that can be shown to people, we need 1,500 offers. If we've got 7 million people in a campaign, it's not just the offers they see, it's the order they see it in, which are most relevant, how you rank them, where they see it. It can be that it could be no two people out of 7 million see exactly the same thing in the same manner. So that's how personalized it can get. But in order to do that, you need to have all the right offers. If everything's in the beauty category, it's not going to work. It's not relevant. So you need a broad set of offers. You need to be big enough. and you need the right partner to do the personalization. I'm not personalizing messages so much, but those are other layers that you can add. The biggest thing that I've seen as far as efficacy is offers where people see some value that is temporary that they will lose, and it's on something they wanted to buy anyway. And that seems to change behavior more than anything else that I've measured.
So just to make sure I have some time for questions, why don't we go to the crowd, let folks ask some questions now. One at a time. There you go.
I have a question. So you talked a lot about segmentation. So when someone signs up for your program, to get the data to segment, are you going based on purchase history, or are you going based on, we're on the loyalty team, and it's always a balance of how much information you're asking the guest to provide up front so that they give it to you and you can mark it correctly, but at the same time so they don't bail on the page because they're...
Yeah. I don't know if you heard the question, but basically it's the balance between if you've got a new customer, they've got no history yet, right? And that's a problem. You need to get them value quickly to get them shopping to collect the data. But I have not been a fan, and this is in grocery retail. This is pretty specific. I've had a lot of peers and had a lot of encouragement to ask people if they're vegan, to ask them what offers they'd like to see. And in my experience, not enough people actually fill that out. But also there's confusion because if you're buying from multiple people or if your needs change, how do I take that into account? So people that sign up and say that they're vegan, I don't know what percentage, but a high percentage of them will be buying beef when it's on sale. And that's because they're buying for a household. So there's ways that personalization information, even though in theory it's 100% accurate because they gave it to you, it gets you over that hump of when they're new, but I wouldn't put too much into that. I would focus on trying to get them shopping with generic value first, basically pay them off to come back in a few times, and then see what those purchases are. And there are some vendors that with just 3 or 4 or 5 trips, if they're broad enough trips, they can start to segment. It does get better. I found again, I'm going to answer in grocery. It's a lot of my experience, but it's also more data points and more frequency. I think I found there was a sweet spot around 3 months, which is a long time to get through, but 3 months worth of data, the personalization was just as good as if they were years. But you need to get them in, like you said, in those first 3 months to get that. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, I was more curiosity as well. Yeah.
All right, if there are no more questions, thank you so much, John Giaquinto, for a great conversation. I don't know if there's a break now. Is this the networking break? Awesome. All right. Enjoy the networking break.